look at some things that we can discover from Joseph's life. There are three things in particular that I want us to see. The first thing is, life is not fair, but it does have to be difficult. Your life is not fair, but it does have to be difficult. Life is not fair, but it is difficult. And this is a classic example. Job had the same thing. Job knew something about an unfair life. If you study the life of Job and you see what's happened in Job's life, you begin to see that Job suffered something that he wasn't responsible for. That was a total spiritual thing, a total spiritual battle. It was Satan himself who said, look, God, you've protected Job, and therefore nothing can happen to him. And God said, okay, I'll give you a chance to see the true thing of what Job is really made out of. And he kind of gave him a door. Hey, Robert, how are the Canes doing today? Good to see you guys. Robert and Darlene, for those of you who are new, there's some people that we ran off some time ago. Now they're trying to sneak back in. We forgot to lock the door. So anyway, Job was suffering something that he wasn't responsible for. He knew about the unfair life. And look what he said, beginning in Job chapter 19, starting with verse 7. Though I cry, I've been wronged, I get no response. Though I call for help, there is no justice. He has blocked my way so I cannot pass. He has shrouded my paths in darkness. He has stripped me of my honor and removed the crown from my head. He tears me down on every side till I'm gone. He uproots my hope like a tree. His anger burns against me. He counts me among his enemies. His troops advance in force. They build a siege ramp against me and encamp around my tent. He has alienated my brothers from me. My acquaintances are completely estranged from me. My kinsmen have gone away. My friends have forgotten me. My guests and my maidservants count me a stranger. They look upon me as an alien. I summon my servant, but he doesn't answer. Though I beg him with my own mouth. And I love this line. My breath is offensive to my wife. I am loathsome to my own brothers. Even the little boys scorn me. When I appear, they ridicule me. All my intimate friends detest me. Those I love have turned against me. I am nothing but skin and bones. I have escaped with only the skin of my teeth. And the skin of my teeth was a way of talking about the gums. He said, oh, I've lost all my teeth. All I have are gums left. That's how bad his life was. You think you got it bad? Look at this. It's our nature to blame God when things go wrong. We do that. We blame God when things go wrong. And we believe that if somebody could have prevented our loss and our harm, that they should have. We would have done that. If we could have stopped somebody from suffering, we would have done that. So why didn't God do it? Where is God when things go wrong? I've always found it interesting that we judge God by what we perceive to be His injustice. God, why didn't you do something? Like God was unjust. That it was God's fault that something happened to us. That God allowed, that God let it happen. God could have stopped it, but He didn't. Why? David the psalmist said it this way in a prophetic psalm that reveals the suffering of Christ. It's Psalm 22. Verses 1 through 8. My God, why have you forsaken me? The exact words that Jesus spoke on the cross. Why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer. By night, and I am not silent. Yet you are enthroned as the Holy One. You are the praise of Israel. In you our fathers put their trust. They trusted you, and you delivered them. They cried to you and were saved. In you they trusted, and they weren't disappointed. But I am a worm and not a man, scorned by men and despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. Why doesn't God step in and stop the suffering? Why doesn't God keep us from suffering, especially when it's not our fault? Why does God allow the wicked to get away with their sin? Why does God tolerate so much injustice? The amazing thing about this psalm, Psalm 22, is that the very questions that are asked about the suffering and injustice, the very statements about sorrow and loss of an oppressed people, are also about the suffering and injustice and the sorrow and the loss that God endured to rescue us from the curse of sin. Do you get that? I mean, you look at it and it's like, those are the things that we go through. We suffer loss. We're in pain. We don't understand. Why doesn't God step in? And the very same thing was true about Christ on the cross. Where was the justice when Jesus was mocked and tortured and falsely accused, brutalized beyond description, and hung on a cross to die for what? For healing people? For making the blind to see and the lame to walk? For raising the dead? For teaching God's love? For making life better? Where was the justice there? Where was God when all of that was going on? Ah, you say, but that was God's will. That was God's plan. Wait a minute. I agree that it was God's will that Jesus die as the ultimate sacrifice for sin. The Bible teaches that. But do you mean to tell me that it was God's will that Jesus be beaten to a bloody pulp, insulted and kicked, and nailed to a cross and stabbed with a spear and laughed at and scorned in his suffering? It was a worse death than any animal sacrifice. Here he was, the sacrifice for man's sin, and it was worse than an animal sacrifice. They didn't treat the animals that way, but they treated another human that way. Where was the justice there? Where was God there? Where was God's justice then? In fact, he seemed so far away that Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" What Jesus was saying was, God, where are you? Where's the justice? How come you can't stop this? Was that all part of God's plan? Or was it sinful man that exacerbated the problem? God said, I want you to die on a cross. You're going to pay the penalty for man's sin. But man exacerbated it. He made it even worse. Oh, God's will was accomplished. But here is a very important note to note. In doing so, when God's will was accomplished, in doing so, it revealed how depraved and sinful man is. And so does your suffering and loss. It's not that God wants you to suffer. It's not that God wants you to have a loss in your life. It's not that God wants things to go wrong in your life. But rather, what happens in your life reveals something about man. Suffering and injustice in the world can't be blamed on God. It's the result of man's sinfulness. When we talk about where was God, remember that we're talking about something that mankind has done. That man did. When people suffer loss and are hurt and are injured and are damaged, and we say, where was God? Remember, what happened was something that man did, not God. 30,000 children aren't going to starve today because it's God's will, but because man's sin and injustice allow it to happen. We can't blame God for that. We have to blame man. Man is the one who's responsible for that, not God. But where is God in all of this? Where is God when people suffer? Where is God when you hurt? Psalm 22, verse 24 says, same psalm that we're looking at, for, and this is a promise, for he has not despised or disdained the suffering or the afflicted one. He's not despised or disdained the suffering. He's not ignoring you. He's not despising you. He's not disdaining you. He has not hidden his face from him, but he has listened to his cry for help. When you're going through that difficult time that just seems so unjust and you have suffered at the hands of somebody else's sin, God knows. He's not despised or disdained you. He has not hidden his face from you. He has heard your cry. Really? Then where is he in those times? Time after time, God confirms in his word that he is well aware of your suffering. He is completely observant of those who harm you. That verse says so. And I want you to catch this. And he's building a case of justice against the unjust. You see, we tend to look at things as immediate. God, I want something now. Where were you now? Why aren't you dealing with this now? And God looks at things eternally. God looks at the eternal consequences. He looks at the eternal picture. What's going on? From an eternal standpoint, what is being accomplished here? What is going to happen? What is God up to? He's preparing destruction for those who have destroyed. That, the word says over and over again. He is preparing destruction for those who have destroyed. He will bring harm to those who have harmed. He is taking notes. I had the privilege a few years ago of sitting in on a court case. A very powerful attorney, just a brilliant attorney, who was defending this guy for some obviously false charges, but anyway, the guy was being accused of this. And I sat in on that case. I was just sitting in the courtroom, and I was actually sitting next to this guy's assistant. And I was watching the court, and day after day, it just seemed like this. The lawyer would sit there, and the prosecution was making their charges, and they were showing their evidence and everything. And this attorney would sit there, and he'd he'd write some things down, and he'd watch, and he'd kind of nod his head, and he'd listen, and he'd write some things down. And it just kind of went on and went on. And when it came time for him to cross-examine, he asked a few questions, but there really wasn't much going on. And after a while, I was thinking, boy, this is not going well at all. And I leaned over to the assistant, and I said, what's going on? Why isn't he taking... I mean, I've seen Perry Como. I know how that works. Why isn't he dealing with this? Why isn't he taking this guy to task? And the assistant leaned over, and he said, he's taking notes. And sure enough, at the right time, he got up with his notes, and he took everything, all of those charges, and all of the evidence and everything, and he decimated it. I mean, he just decimated it. And completely blew the whole trial out of the water. Listen, your God is taking notes. That's what he's doing. That's what he's up to. Your case of suffering and injustice just hasn't gone to court yet. And as far as God is concerned, he's building an open and closed case. He's taking notes, and he knows how it's going to turn out. He knows already. Look what Isaiah chapter 10 says. I want you to look at a couple of passages in Isaiah and see what God is up to. Look at this. Isaiah chapter 10, verses 3 and 4. What will you do on the day of reckoning, when disaster comes from afar? To whom will you run for help? Where will you leave your riches? Nothing will remain but to cringe among the captives or fall among the slain. It was God speaking to people who had been unjust, who had done the wrong thing, who had been unfair, who had wreaked havoc on God's people. Isaiah 11, verses 4 and 5. But with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. God says, oh yeah, there is justice coming. That time is coming. That day is coming. I'm building the case. I'm taking notes. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. With the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. Righteousness will be his belt, and faithfulness the sash around his waist. Now listen. Life is not fair, but it does have to be difficult. Because mankind stands opposed to God. And we're going to suffer the consequences of mankind's rebellion against God. When you suffer injustice, when you are hurt in life because of someone else's sin, you are proving once again why Jesus had to die on the cross. And why God reveals in Revelation what he's up to right now. You want to know what God is up to right now? Look at this passage in Revelation, beginning with chapter 21, beginning with verse 3. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away.